Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. It is October 19th, 2024. The time now is 8:26 p.m. Eastern Time. Came on early because it's Saturday night, so I'm sure everybody's out there hanging out, having fun. So I just wanted to continue on the chapter that I left off yesterday, which was on now entering the CIA. And they're talking about something called the Project Chatter. Now, in the late 1940s, mind control experimentation was initiated by narco-hypnotic techniques, as well as in the administrating of drugs with contradictory effects to induce what is called the quote-unquote Twilight Zone state. Among the drugs that were most commonly used in this kind of research were disoxin and pentothal, and seconal and dexedrine. The CIA experimenters fixed intravenous hookups into both of the subjects' arms, monitoring the effects of the drugs and regulating their flow. The idea was to, according to laborers in the CIA's mind fields, was to create a sudden cathartic expulsion of the feelings and thoughts and the communication of any information that the subject, meaning the targeted person that they were experimenting on, might be hiding. In 1947, the Navy instituted the Project Chatter, which was run by Dr. Samuel Thomas. He was a Navy commander and a psychiatrist. He worked with G. Richard Wendt, whom was the chairman of the psychology department at the University of Rochester. Excuse me. The Project Chatter is reported to have been a relatively unsuccessful truth drug project that ended in 1953. I don't believe that. Every time they tell you it was unsuccessful, that means they succeeded, especially if they ended the project early. So at about the same time, the Army was involved in the quote-unquote third chance and derby hat. The mindset of the CIA at this inception reflected in a top-secret report that was submitted to President Eisenhower in 1954. The report called for aggressive, covert, psychological, political, and paramilitary organization to be more effective, more unique, and if necessary, more ruthless than employed by the enemy. And they stated, we must learn to subvert, to sabotage, and to destroy our enemies by more clever, more sophisticated, and more effective methods than those used against us. According to John Marks, in 1949, the Office of Scientific Intelligence, the OSI, undertook the analysis of foreign work on certain unconventional warfare techniques. This included behavioral drugs, with an initial objective of developing the capabilities to resist or to offset the effect of such drugs. The preliminary phases included the review of the drug-related work at the institutions such as Mount Sinai Hospital, Boston Psychopathic Hospital, the University of Illinois, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Valley Forge General Hospital, Detroit Psychopathic Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, and the National Institute of Health. This first project, Marks states, the code name was Project Bluebird. And this was assigned the function of discovering means of conditioning personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information from them by known means. It was further assigned to investigate the possibility of control of an individual by application of special interrogation techniques. They did this through memory enhancement and establishing defensive means for preventing interrogation of agency personnel. The Black Budget Bluebird Project was run by Morse Allen, which was intended to create an exploitable alteration of the personality of its agents. They wanted to do this to POWs, to refugees, and defectors, and CIA employees of the program, which were dispatched around the world to procure rare botanicals, herbs, and drugs that might be used. The primary agency involved the Bluebird, which was the Joint Intelligence Committee. This is the same group responsible for the Project Paperclip importation of Nazis into the United States. At least 1,000 soldiers were fed with 20 doses of LSD under the auspice of the Bluebird. Other documented Bluebird projects included and involved the dispatching of a team to Tokyo in July of 1950, and in August of 51, Project Bluebird was renamed to Project Artichoke and was transferred from the Office of Scientific Intelligence, the OSI, to the Office of Security, the OS. Additionally, LSD experiments were done by the CIA under the auspice of Project Artichoke. They used agency volunteers and were verified by the CIA memorandum. And they also used unwitting subjects. One artichoke experiment is documented in a CIA memorandum to the director that was dated July 14th, 1952. The memo deals with the use of narcohypnotic induction, sodium pentothal, and the stimulant desoxin. The interrogation was conducted on a Russian agent that was believed to be a double agent. According to the memo, a psychiatric medical cover was used to bring the Project Artichoke techniques into action. In the first case, light dosages of drugs coupled with hypnosis were used to induce a complete hypnotic trance. This trance was held for approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes of interrogation, which, with a subsequent total amnesia that was produced by the post-hypnotic suggestion. So there they can hypnotize the person and then make them forget through hypnosis. In the second case, an individual of much higher intelligence than the first, a deep hypnotic trance was reached at an ultra-light medication. This was followed by an interrogation lasting for well over an hour. However, a partial amnesia only was obtained at this time, although a total amnesia was obtained for a major part of the test. Since further interrogation was desired, a second test was made on this individual, in which the Project Artichoke technique was using a straight medication that was employed. On this test, highly successful results were obtained, in that a full interrogation lasting 2 hours and 15 minutes was produced, part of which included a remarkable regression. During this regression, the subject actually relived certain past activities of his life, some dating back 15 years, while in addition, the subject totally accepted Mr. Redacted, the case officer Redacted, as an old, trusted, and beloved personnel friend whom the subject had known in years past in Georgia, in the USSR. Total amnesia was apparently achieved for the entire second test on this case. The memo concluded that for a matter of record, the case of officers involved in both cases expressed they themselves to the effect of the artichoke operations were entirely successful, and the team members felt that the tests demonstrated conclusively the effectiveness of the combined chemical hypnotic technique in such cases. In both cases, the subjects talked clearly, at a great length, and furnished information which the case officers considered extremely valuable. More insight into Project Artichoke is provided by the conference summary, which was addressed to the Chief of Security at the CIA on July 15, 1953. Mr. Redacted then discussed the situation of the former agency official who had become a chronic alcoholic and who at present was undergoing operative treatment in Redacted for a possible brain tumor. This individual had called the agency prior to the operation and warned that when given certain types of anesthetics, sodium pentothal, previously he had been known to talk coherently. The matter was taken care of by placing a representative in the operating room and by bringing in the various personnel participating in the operation that was going under the secrecy agreement. Mr. Redacted stated that the subject did not talk extensively under the influence of sodium pentothal and revealed internal problems of the agency. Dr. Redacted added that he was acquainted with the details in the case. Dr. Redacted then commented that this type of thing had been a source of great concern to himself and others in the operation, which worked, and stated that he hoped that Project Artichoke's efforts would produce some method that would perhaps guarantee amnesia on the part of those knowing of the agency operations, especially in vital spots, hope to be successful. He stated that some individuals in the agency had to know tremendous amounts of information, and if any could be found to produce amnesias for this type of information, for instance, after the individual had left the agency, it would be remarkable. Mr. Redacted stated that the need for amnesias was particularly great in operations work. Mr. Redacted explained that work was continually being done in an effort to produce controlled amnesia by various means. Now, a CIA Artichoke document that was dated July 30th, 1956, mentioned the use of the alkaloid bulbocapnine to induce catatonia and stupor. The document stated, "We desire to have certain psychochemical properties tested on men using a bulbocapnine, which we were fortunate to obtain from Redacted. This is a sample being enclosed herewith. More of the drug is available if needed." A request was included that the subjects be tested for loss of speech, loss of sensitivity to pain, and loss of memory, and loss of willpower. So now they talk about coming on to LSD. So them using LSD on populations and when it was discovered. So members of the American intelligence agencies were not the first group to be interested in the use of psychedelic drugs for behavior modification. Early on, the main proponents of the use of psychoactive drugs in Western culture were the social planners and the global elite. Just before the new century, in 1898, a medical man and literature of the Fabian socialist Havelock Ellis began experimentation with peyote. Today, Ellis is primarily known for his 7-volume Psychology of Sex, but in the early part of the century, he was a prime mover in literary and intellectual circles, particularly in communist and anarchist groups. Ellis described his experiences with peyote in Mescal, a New Artificial Paradise. He published this in January of 1898 in an issue of the Contemporary Review. Interest in peyote and the synthesized version of alkaloid or mescaline remained scant, and this was outside of the occasional parlor peyote ritual, which was conducted in a not dissimilar way from the spiritualist fad of the same era. The odd psychiatric monograph talking about the drug seemed to reproduce schizophrenia. But a far more potent brain changer would soon appear on the scene. This was LSD. LSD was the first synthesized in 1938 at Sandoz Laboratory, and this was in Basel, Switzerland. Although the effects of the drug are said not to have been discovered by Dr. Albert Hofmann until 1943, Basel, I say Basel, but it's probably Basel. Basel was the home of three huge chemical companies, Hoffmann La Roche, Ciba Geigy, and Sandoz, the latter owned by German chemical monolith IG Farben, the mainstay of the Third Reich's war. Although the connection is not often made and is denied by Dr. Hoffmann, IG Farben maintained a division that was researching psychoactive agents, and it is possible that Hoffmann was employed in this capacity. It is also a world-class coincidence that the SS and the Gestapo doctors were doing mescaline experiments on the prisoners at Dachau. And this was at the same time less than 200 miles away. Alan Dulles, who directed the CIA during mind control experiments in MKUltra project, was stationed chief at Bern, Switzerland, during the period of the LSD research, and had been an executive at IG Farben. His assistant was James Warburg, who later worked with acid popularizer Aldous Huxley. Captain Al Herbert, the spy who was termed the Johnny Appleseed of LSD, told the story of the beginnings of LSD in a different form than the usual chronologies. He said that Hoffmann had discovered LSD many years earlier, and that he had been a member of the secret group that was connected with Rudolf Steiner's mystical anthroposophy, or posophy, that had set out to manufacture a quote-unquote peace pill in the early 1930s. Early experiments with LSD were conducted by Werner Stoll. He was a psychiatrist affiliated with the University of Zurich. There were rumors that one of Stoll's female patients was given a drug without her knowledge and had committed suicide. This is a foreshadowing of later CIA atrocities against their own. Although perhaps a marginally less potent drug than the television broadcasting that was launched at nearly the same time, the LSD infusion of America was to have a tremendous effect on the future of the country. When LSD arrived in America in 1949, psychiatry was booming and having experienced an approximate 12-fold increase in 1940. The character of psychiatry was, in many ways, an extension of the wartime psychiatry. Not surprising considering the fact that the American quote-unquote mental health organizations were predominantly being puppeteered from the Tavistock Institute. As per the Society, which was engineered by the organization after Brigadier General William Menninger was elected as the head. He was the head of the American psychiatry. An ambitious strategy was hammered out, namely the application of psychiatry to the man in the street. He got high. So the cult of MKUltra. What about it? In September of 1950, Edward Hunter was a CIA employee working as a journalist. He published information that the Chinese were using brainwashing techniques on the American prisoners of war in Korea, forcing them to to confess to crimes such as the use of germ warfare. In fact, the Americans were using germ warfare, but this provided the CIA with a cover with their own mind control research. They were simply attempting to catch up to the advances of the communists. This was not a true picture, as admitted by the CIA Deputy Director Richard Helms in 1963, when he informed the Warren Commission that American mind control research had always been more advanced than that of the communists. CIA Director Allen Dulles was also out stomping for mind control. Addressing the National Alumni Conference at Princeton University on April 10, 1953, he talked about, quote, how sinister the battle for men's minds had become in the Soviet hands. 3 days later, Dulles authorized MKUltra, a greatly augmented series of mind-controlled projects that were run by the technical services staff of the CIA. The MKUltra project was the code name for a huge mind control project, according to CIA documents. They stated this was an umbrella project for funding sensitive projects, run by the CIA and coordinated by the British intelligence, the Scottish Rite Freemasons, and a very recently reformed Nazis. The related MK Delta covered policy and procedure for the use of biochemicals in clandestine operations. MKUltra was birthed when Richard Helms, the head of the CIA's Directorate of Operations, which was known as the Dirty Tricks Department, recommended that the agency expand its work in both offensive and defensive brainwashing. No mere grunt in the CIA trenches, Helms was the Eastern establishment all the way. His grandfather, the first director of the International Bank of Settlements, the IBS, and a president of the Federal Reserve, Helms would be present at the death of MKUltra when he ordered the destruction of the program's files in 1966. That's right, most of the MKUltra files were destroyed, shredded, burned. The program was run by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. He stated, the brainstorming genius of MKUltra, who until 1973 would supervise the CIA's research into mind control. Gottlieb was viewed with favor by Richard Helms and would hang on to Helms' coattails as he climbed to higher and higher positions in the agency. Dulles diverted an initial $300,000 for MKUltra. According to agency documents, the program was planned to operate outside of normal channels without the usual contractual arrangements and was to be highly compartmented. The primary front for funding MKUltra operation was the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, and that was created in 1930. This was staffed by Rockefeller finance psychologists and eugenicists. The foundation was headed by Black Chamber alumnus General Marlborough Churchill. The Macy Foundation's medical director during 1954 to 1955 was Frank Fremont Smith. He was also the president of General Rees's World Federation of Mental Health. The recollections of an intelligence officer detailed in a CIA memorandum flesh out the scope of the MKUltra project. In January 17th of 1975, the memorandum for the record subject, MKUltra, said the following. 1. The following represents the best of my unaided recollection regarding the MKUltra program. I was first briefed on it in 1962. At that time, it was in the process of a significant decrease in activity and funding. As Chief Defense and Espionage CDNE, I continued to decrease funds significantly each year until the program was phased out in the late 1960s. 2. MKUltra was a group of projects, most of which dealt with drug or counter-drug research and development. The director from the director, Central Intelligence DCI, and the deputy director of plans, DDP, were kept informed on the program via annual briefings by the Chief Technical Service Division and his deputy. Most of the research and development was externally contracted and dealt with various materials which were purported to have characteristics appealing for their covert and clandestine administration, and this was done under operational conditions. The objectives were behavioral control, behavioral anomaly production, and countermeasures for opposition application of similar substances. Work was performed at the United States industrial, academic, and underground governmental research facilities. Funding was often cut out arrangements. Testing was usually done at such time as laboratory work was successfully completed and was often carried out at such facilities as redacted and the redacted. In all cases that I am aware of, testing was done using volunteer inmates who were witting of the nature of the test program, but not the ultimate sponsoring organization. 3. As the Soviet drug use scare and the amount of significant progress in MKUltra program decreased, the program's activities were curtailed significantly as budgetary pressure and alternative priorities dictated. 4. Over my stated objections, the MKUltra files were destroyed by order of DCI, and that was Mr. Helms. And this was done shortly before his departure from the office. A large network of doctors and facilities were employed in at least 149 sub-projects, all of them relating to mind control. MKUltra and MK Delta research was used at least 139 different drugs, as well as radiation and electroshock therapy, but also delved into the more arcane social applications in sociology, anthropology, and psychiatry. What might those buzz terms have concealed? Eugenics experiments, genetic manipulation, Tavistoconian or Tavistock social engineering. Within the first year of its operation, MKUltra was taking it to the streets. Drugs that had shown promise in a lab were slipped to unwitting subjects in normal social situations and gatherings. Citizens were dosed with psychotropics without their knowledge. This portion of the project was supposedly terminated in 1963, although there are suggestions that this was not the case. Early CIA LSD research by the CIA was conducted by Max Rinkel and Robert Hyde, reportedly the first Americans to take LSD at the Boston Psychopathic Hospital. Carl Pfeiffer at the University of Illinois, Harold Hodge at the University of Rochester, and Harold Abramson at Mount Sinai Hospital and Columbia University in New York. Harris Isbell at the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, and Louis Joyun at west of the University of Oklahoma. Other early experimentations in LSD research was done by Dr. Joel Elks, who had concocted nerve gases in Britain during World War II. He performed experiments with LSD in England in 1949, later moving his base of operations to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Dr. Harold Abramson, who had studied in Berlin prior to World War II and was later employed in the technical division of the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service, received $85,000 for an LSD study. His proposal indicated that he, quote unquote, hoped to give hospital patients who are essentially normal from psychiatric point of view unwitting doses of the drug for psychotherapeutic purposes. So he was dosing regular hospital, you know, I guess patients that were there for something else, dosing them with LSD. Fucking bastards. So Abramson was directed to produce operationally pertinent materials along the following lines. This is what they wanted to see. A. Disturbance of memory. B. Discrediting abhorrent behavior. C. Alteration of sex patterns. D. Eliciting of information. E. They wanted to see suggestibility in the targeted individuals. F. They wanted to create dependency. They wanted them to get addicted to the drug. Abramson performed his research at Columbia University and Cold Springs Harbor, Long Island, New York. The latter location of both of Dulles brothers and their estates at ground zero for eugenics. This zero for eugenics research in America since the turn of the century was run by the Dulles brothers. Abramson was responsible for giving LSD to Frank Fremont Smith and British cultural anthropologist Gregory Bateson and his wife Margaret Mead, both of whom were involved with the Tavistock Institute and an MK Ultra projects. Bateson established an LSD research center at Palo Alto Veterans Administration at the hospital in California and gave LSD, or what we call in the streets acid, to beat poet Allen Ginsberg, among many others. As CIA research into LSD continued, the intoxication was contagious. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the director of MK Ultra, and his staff were regularly partying with LSD and spiking each other's drinks for a lark. At one bash on November 1953, Gottlieb slipped LSD into Dr. Frank Olson's Cointreau without his knowledge. Olson became deeply depressed and was taken to the doctor to see Dr. Harold Abramson. After the first visit, Abramson came to see Olson at his hotel room, carrying a bottle of bourbon and a bottle of Nebutal. As John Marks comments, quote, an unusual combination for a doctor to give someone with symptoms like Olson's. Olson was scheduled to be taken to Chestnut Lodge at Rockwell, Maryland Sanitarium, where many of the psychiatrists had top secret CIA clearances. The night before he was to enter the sanitarium, he leaped, so it is reported, to his death through the closed window of Stalter Hilton in New York. So they probably threw him through the window. The CIA immediately went into cover-up mode on the Olson death. Although his widow was given a government pension, the truth about the cause of his scientist's death would not be admitted for 2 decades. Alice, Frank Olson's wife, went on national TV and read the following statement from the family at the time. This is what she stated. We feel our family has been violated by the CIA in 2 ways. First, Frank Olson was experimented upon illegally and negligently. Second, the true nature of his death was concealed for 22 years. In telling our story, we are concerned that neither the person or personnel pain this family has experienced, nor the moral and political outrage we feel be slighted. Only in this way can Frank Olson's death become part of American memory and serve the purpose of political and ethical reform urgently needed in our society. For their complicity in Olson's death, Gottlieb and his team received a verbal reprimand that was not recorded in their personal files. The Olson story was not over. Forensic scientists investigated the case and exhumed the man's body in 1994. They reported that they found skull fractures that suggested it was a homicide. So the scientist was killed by the CIA scientist. Unbelievable. I mean, it's not shocking. It's the CIA. This is what they do. They kill their own. That's why you should never work for the government, folks. I would never work for the government because of this. They're traitors. They will kill you in a heartbeat. Doesn't matter how long you've served. Unbelievable. So they reported that they found a skull fracture that suggested homicide rather than an accident. One can only speculate about what really happened to Frank Olson. Was he threatening to blow the whistle on the MKUltra project that night before his death? Freemason Dr. Paul Hodge was another person involved in investigating the LSD for the CIA. Hodge was a member of the American Eugenics Society and a co-director with former Nazi eugenicist Franz Kallmann. He was part of the research at Columbia University in New York State Psychiatric Institute. Hodge and Kallmann worked under the direction of the Scottish Rite Freemasons field representative. And this was a field representative of research on dementia, Dr. Nolan D.C. Lewis. Hodge was also appointed state mental hygiene commissioner by New York's Governor Averell Harriman and was reappointed to the position by Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Another MKUltra mastermind was a 33rd degree Mason, Robert Hanna Felix. He was the director of psychiatric research for the Scottish Rite at the NIMH he was a director from 1949 to 1963. So let me stop right here. These individuals are part of the secret societies. On top of that, they're part of the intelligence community. And on top of that, they work with Nazis in America on these horrific, horrible experiments against the population without the population's knowledge. And on top of that, were involved in murdering their own colleagues because their own colleagues wanted to expose the psychosis of these projects, right? This is what we get. This is why a lot of people are going to say things like, this happened, in the 60s. This happened actually, this has been happening over and over every decade. There's some new scandal, some new research, some new lie, some new situation that we have to deal with. This happens all the time. I'm really torn between standing for the nation and wanting the fucking nation I want to see the nation burn. I'm really torn because these are the people that we have in power that have all the funding and continue to do this shit against us, against their own citizens, against their own colleagues, against their own workers, against their own employees that have given their life to serve the country, right? It's enough that they do it to its own population, its own citizenry. But then they do it to their own coworkers. They do it to their own servicemen. This pisses me off. This is why I understand when people are against the government all the time. That you don't want to represent your nation because they're engaging in these fucking activities against their own populations. They're constantly doing these secret programs, and then you're the bad guy. You that want to know the truth, that want to expose the wrongdoing because we're claiming to be civilized and we're claiming to be the best of the West, you get considered a terrorist or extremists when they're fucking doing extreme shit all the time. They're constantly doing this fucking psychotic shit. They don't care. There's no loyalty from any agency. I realize that. It's just a label that people put on their titles because they have to. There is no loyalty in government. The government is not loyal to the government. Or excuse me, let me take that back. The government employees in the higher levels and even in the lower levels, but at the higher levels, have no loyalty to the nation. There is no loyalty. Their only loyalty is to the dark entity that they probably worship, power, and money. That's the only loyalty they have, to power, money, and the entity that they serve. How is this? How is targeting your own population part of national security? Experimenting on your population. And we're the ones that are holding this whole thing together. We are the ones that are holding the system that does this together. And if we want to bring it, we want to bring it home. This is why we have corrupt politicians from the lower levels, from the state, from your city, your county, your state, your federal government. This is why you have all these corrupt individuals doing whatever the fuck they want. Because we're out here still thinking that they give a shit about us, or that they give a shit about humanity, or that they care about the nation, or that they care about this Constitution. They don't give a shit about the Constitution. Haven't you seen how they're wiping their ass with the Constitution every single day? Democrat and Republican? Democrat and Republican? You think Republicans are going to do anything other than what the Democrats have been doing? Remember, the rhinos are the same as the Democrats. I'm just keeping it 100. The Lindsey Grahams of the world, there's like a million of them in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. They're going to do the same shit as Biden and Obama and the Clintons and all the motherfuckers. Same thing. Who is upholding the Constitution? The Bill of Rights. Who? Look at what's happening in every state. Washington State, Oregon, Portland. I'm obviously talking about the cities. California is basically a shit state. Like Trump says about Haiti and other countries. California is a shithole. New York City is a shithole. Look around, folks. Chicago is a shithole. We're talking about the third world, and we got the third world right here in our backyard. Let's be real. Let's be real about this. We got the third world right here in our backyard, even before the borders were open. A lot of people don't want to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Oh, well, your country's being destroyed not by foreigners, by your own folks. Judas is inside the gates. There's like a million of Judas in government. They're inside the gate. They are making your laws. They're destroying the country. They're dismantling the country because they're answering to a higher power of a dark force of some secret society in the corner coming out of some fucking place in Europe that has no loyalty to no nation, to no president, to no prime minister, to nobody. Thems are the facts. They're not loyal to any paper that says you have the freedom of this and that and this and that and this and that. No. There's no such thing anymore. It was a dream. What was it that, what's his name? The Mason that signed it, what was his name? Oh my God, I just went blank on this guy. Who was the signer? He was part of the Masonic lodges. No, not John. The one that used to drink a lot and party at Hell's Club. He was part of the Hell's Club. The Hell's Club Society. What was his name? Anyways, him. He said that here's the pristine document of enlightenment if you can keep it, right? Democracy, republic, if you can keep it. The republic, if you can keep it. That shit's been lost a long time ago. People sold out. Anyways, where was I? So Hodge and Kelman worked under the direction of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry field representative of research on dementia, Dr. Nolan D.C. Lewis. Hodge was also appointed to State Mental Hygiene Commission. Again, mental hygiene is a eugenist phrase that they used in the early 1900s, commissioned by the New York Governor Averell Harriman, and was reappointed to the position by Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Another MK Ultra mastermind was 33rd degree Mason Robert Hanna Felix, which was director of psychiatric research at the NIMH and the Scottish Rite in 1949 to 63. Using CIA funds, Felix personally oversaw the experiments of Dr. Harris Isbell, who gave black prisoners LSD for 75 consecutive days, tripling and quadrupling the dosage when the inmates demonstrated drug tolerance. So there you go again, doing this against their will. For 70, do you know what it is to take LSD for 75 consecutive, 2.5 months more consecutive days? You know what that does to your brain and your body? Have any of you ever tried LSD? One dose, 1 day. Imagine almost 3 months of everyday dosing against your will. So black prisoners that were being dosed, tripling, quadrupling the dosage when the inmates showed drug tolerance, and where drug-induced sleep was periodically interrupted by electroshock. So not only did they get drug and were involved in Alice in Wonderland and beyond, probably the worst things you can think of. I can think of a lot of things that I've seen in LSD. These people were then electroshocked, meaning electrocuted awake, while under the drug. See, this is Nuremberg stuff that was allowed to happen in the United States, and nobody went to jail. Nobody lost their jobs. Nobody paid a penalty. And how many people were killed? And how many people became brain dead or mentally disabled? Yes, I should be angry. You should be angry. Everyone should be angry about this. So 75 days, they gave electroshock to wake them up. And according to the Senate subcommittee testimony of former inmate James Childs, volunteers for the Isbell Project were paid off with heroin. So, and then on top of that, after they did all those things to them, after they tortured them with the electric shock, then they shut them up with heroin. Well, of course, probably all of them took the heroin because they were already mentally fried. Child said, quote, "You knock on this little door and the guy would look out and I would say, I want 15 milligrams. He would say, where do you want it? In your arm, in your skin, or in your vein?" Everybody that was on the research got the payoff of drugs. In 1953, Los Angeles psychiatrist Dr. Nick Barcel was contacted by the CIA and asked to determine how much LSD it would take to send the entire population of the city of Los Angeles on a drug trip. So the CIA was crazy enough that they were going to drug the whole city of Los Angeles with LSD. See, that's why I don't trust the government. So I'm the crazy one. I'm the crazy one because I don't trust them when they're doing this kind of shit that they want to drug a whole population like of millions of people in California. I'm the crazy one, right? Oh my God. Dude, they should all rot in hell, every single one of them. And if they're dead, they should be in hell 20 times over in the deepest caverns of hell. Fucking A. So, anyways, they ask, how much do you need? How much LSD would you need to basically drug the whole city of Los Angeles? Bercell's results were disappointing. He found that chlorine in the water, thank God for chlorine at this moment, even though chlorine kills you, thank God for chlorine. He found that chlorine in the water supply neutralized the LSD drug. The CIA, according to internal documents, went right to work on a version of LSD that would not be affected by chlorine. These fucking assholes. The CIA may have actually attempted to dose an entire town somewhat earlier. Well, they did. They dosed Saint Esprit, France, a small little town in France that had no idea what was happening to them. And I think a couple of people died. So at Pont Saint Esprit in France, 1951, the whole town suddenly went crazy. Many people died during the course of the unexplained quote unquote hysteria. And hallucinogenics after effects were felt by townspeople for weeks. Although the incident is usually attributed to effects of ergot contaminated flour, I doubt that. It was CIA. It was the CIA with the LSD. The date of occurrence near the beginning of the CIA interest in LSD is more than interesting. A similar, although less deadly, incident took place in the United States in 1989, when 600 junior and senior high school students were preparing for a music program in Santa Monica, California. A sudden rash of headaches and nausea, dizziness, and fainting affected 250 students. Given the CIA and other intelligence agencies' history for drug testing on civilians, it is not impossible that this was such another case. In the mid-1950s, Operation Big City in New York used a 1953 Mercury automobile with a tailpipe that was extended 18 inches to emit, hold on, had a tailpipe extended 18 inches to emit a gas, probably LSD, into the middle of the streets in New York. Another test in the same series of tests were undertaken with a battery-powered emission equipment that fitted into a suitcase. The equipment was used to spray LSD in New York's subway system. Oh my God. An unnamed gas was released off the Golden Gate Bridge about the same time, although it is said to have dissipated in the wind without causing anyone any harm. So they've done this a lot. Now we know why it was so easy for them to do the Woo 2020. In 1957, CIA Inspector General Lehman issued the following internal memo, stating that, quote unquote, precautions must be taken not only to protect the operations from exposure to the enemy forces, but also to conceal these activities from the American public. The knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical, illicit activities would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to the accomplishment. From the beginning, the CIA's work with LSD was their concern. It relied upon the Swiss for their supply of drug, while obtaining weekly supplies from Sandoz, The CIA was also funding the Eli Lilly Company in the United States, and they were being used to synthesize the drug so as to ensure a steady supply. In 1954, Lilly announced that they had succeeded. A memo to Allen Dulles noted that within unlimited supplies, the LSD could now be taken seriously as a chemical warfare agent and that it could be bought in tonnage quantities. The most infamous MKUltra doctors was Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. In 1942, the Rockefeller Foundation founded the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University, that's located at Gothic Ravenscrag in Montreal, Canada. Dr. Cameron was placed in charge of the psychiatric division and began experimentation straight out of the Rocky Horror Show, but lacking the wit. The program was funded by the Canadian military, the Rockefeller Foundation, the OSS, which is later the CIA, and Cameron's training was at the Royal Mental Hospital in Glasgow, Scotland. He served under Sir David Henderson, which was a eugenicist. Cameron went on to found the World Federation of Mental Health's Canadian Division in association with his friend, Brigadier General John Rawlings Rees, who worked at the Tavistock. They became arguably the most influential psychiatrist on the planet. He became president of just about every psychiatric organization that was there at the time. The Canadian, the American, the World Psychiatric Organizations, the Quebec Psychiatric Association, the American Psychopathological Association, and the Society of Biological Psychiatry. Oh my God, we're fucked. Shit. Cameron was no rogue in the field of psychiatry, but instead one of its most influential leaders. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, a Pentagon liaison to the CIA at the time of Cameron's experiments in 1992 stated, "If you get a hold of the director for the American Psychiatric Association in around 1956 and 57, you'll be surprised to find that an enormous percentage of the individuals listed are foreign born. Mostly, they came out of Germany and Eastern Europe in a big wave. They were all called, quote unquote, technical specialists, but really they were psychiatrists. They went into the jobs of the universities mostly, but many were working on the unconventional mind control programs for the United States intelligence. Now we know, let me stop here. Now we know why we have all these issues at the universities. And now we know why, again, all these curriculums are being introduced to younger and younger populations, like in elementary schools. This is where we get the sexualization of the children. This is where, these are the individuals, by the way, again, ruling elite and military personnel and intelligence communities are literally programming your children. We can no longer deny this. This is not some regular grassroots, whatever, perversion thing. This is funded by foundations and institutions, approved, rolled out, and forced onto the populations by the globalist institutions. It is clear. Are we awake yet? Can we direct our energy to the proper people? So these would go to people like Dr. Cameron in Canada. In 1957, Cameron submitted a grant application to, quote, the Society for the Investigations of Human Ecology, also known as the Human Ecology Fund, which was a CIA front working out of Cornell University Medical School in New York City. Cameron's application proposed the funding of experimentation, which involved the breaking down of ongoing patterns of patients' behavior. What do you okay, I'm reading this to you, and I'm looking at the curriculums in schools right now with the trans personalities and the storybook personalities. This is exactly what they're doing. So let me read this to you and just think about what's happening in the schools right now. The experimentations involve the breaking down of ongoing patterns of patients' behaviors by means of uh, this was talking about, again, this is old, right? 1950s, 1960s. But the breaking down of patients' behaviors by means of particular intensive electroshocks. Nowadays, it's called deep patterning, and they're doing it with technology, propaganda, and your laptops, TVs, shows, and, linguistics. Two, the intensive repetition. Okay, so the repetition of these things, 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. So the repetition, intensive repetition of the prearranged verbal signal. So what are they doing? The words that they use: woke, safe spaces, woke, safe spaces, woke, unalived, all these different words constantly being promoted on your TV, in your schools, on every show, in the radio, in the brochures of the schools, in the documents of Congress, the Congress people, the politicians, your teachers, your neighbors. Repetition, repeat, repeat, repeat in the minds of men. So I'm going to read this again. They want to break down the patterns of patients' behaviors by depatterning. They want intensive repetition, 7 days a week, basically 24 hours a day. This is to prearrange their verbal signals. 3, during this period of intensive repetition, the patient is kept in partial sensory isolation. They don't have to do that anymore. Again, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. 4, repression of the driving period is carried out by putting the patient, after the conclusion of the period, into continuous sleep 7 to 10 days. They don't do that. You don't need to do that anymore, right? After receiving the request for $60,000, Cameron and his underlings employed these and wide variety of other mind-blasting techniques on targeted individual subjects who had in many cases not volunteered for the experimentation. Those techniques seemingly more suited for the torture of prisoners of war than for the rehabilitation of Canadian citizens, including quote-unquote sleep treatments, which were developed by Hassan Azima at the Institute, and the administration of thorazine and barbiturates on the continuous basis so that a patient would sleep 20 to 22 hours a day. Using the British page Russell electroconvulsive technique, Cameron would put victims into drug-induced comas for weeks, waking them to administer a 1-second electroshock, which were followed by 5 to 9 additional jolts depending on the itchiness of his trigger finger. Cameron increased the voltage normally administered by practitioners of this technique and the number of shock sessions from 1 to 2 or 3 per day. So again, this was in the 50s. They've perfected mind control with technology. They've rolled out the drugs. This is why we have an epidemic of fentanyl and barbiturates, going into the 2000s, right? Oxycontin, Xanax, what was the other? Percocets, all these drugs. People get addicted. Everyone's being programmed with your TV. You're being programmed with your laptop. You're being programmed with your cell phone. You're being programmed with, podcasts, because I'm sure there's some agents working for some podcast. You're being programmed with the TV shows and the movies. And now they have remote neuromonitoring. So you're taking the drugs, You're getting the subliminal suggestions. You're awake but asleep because your subconscious mind is completely open now because they've been able to oscillate your brains. They can torture you by electronic means through Wi-Fi. They can stream voices into your head. I mean, we're in deep shit, folks. Like, seriously, deep, deep shit. Thank God that many people still go outside. Because if not, this whole place will be burning down to the ground. And as I'm talking, ooh, they're knocking me about. Keep trying, baby. Keep trying, because I'm letting the folks know. Okay. So they do sleep deprivation. He would use and administer the voltage. He would increase the voltage and then the number of shock sessions. He would do 2 to 3 per day. Predictably, patients given this kind of treatment were often reduced to vegetative states. Another of Cameron's strategies was to place his victims in a sensory deprivation chamber. Oh my God. He would put the targeted, the victims, he would put them in a sensory deprivation chamber for 2 months, 3 months, up to 65 days. And then not only that, he was giving them LSD while they were in that sensory deprivation chamber for 65 days, devastating them with LSD, then using quote unquote psychic driving, in which repetitive phrases were taken from the emotionally charged material they had told the psychiatrist. So he would use what they would reveal under the drugs and use it against them and then repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. Bro, that is evil. And by the way, the Satanists do the same thing. They do the same thing. So the psychiatrist would be played through a pillow with unremovable earphones. Cameron documented his researches in psychic driving, which was funded by the Department of Health and Welfare between 1961 and 1964. Okay, and you want us to believe in the WHO and the NIH and the Psychiatry Association or the Medical Association or the Drug Association? Are you kidding me? So he did this between 1961 to 1964. And he titled his research paper, The Study of Factors which Promote Retarded Personality Changes in Individuals. So he was making people mentally disabled. So study of factors which promote retarded personality change in individuals exposed to prolonged, this is the whole title, exposed to prolonged repetition of verbal signals and the effects upon human behavior of repetition of verbal signals. According to one psychiatrist, Cameron's theory was, quote, the ways in which people behave are determined by some sort of nervous system arrangements in the brain. This is why they torture you, right? Since psychotherapy can change behavior, the neural arrangements must be reversible. Cameron himself wondered whether the behavior patterns of adults could be erased by physiological processes that attack the neural patterns. Could adults be made theoretically patternless? Could they be returned to a state of neurological and psychological infancy? Isn't that what we're seeing now with adults? Women that act like they're 10, men that act like they're 12 and they're in their 30s and they're in their 40s and they're in their 50s. Isn't that what we're seeing today? So he said, can we do this? Can we neurologically and psychologically make adults infants again for a short period? And then could the new patterns of behavior be introduced? So take them back to childhood and then build them back up with your brainwashing and manipulation. Does one detect the flavor of Tavistock here? By 1960, Cameron had developed his techniques, which he termed ultra conceptual communication, into something even more horrific. The period of psychic driving was increased to 16 hours a day, for 20 to 30 days in each patient. The patients were dosed with Cernal to quote unquote block sensory input and produce underactivity. Cernal is an extremely powerful drug that is used as an animal anesthetic. It produces acute psychotic episodes and even the danger of chronic psychosis in humans. Although the standards for medical experimentation had been clearly defined at the Nuremberg Conference or trials, which was almost 10 years before Cameron's funding by the CIA, specifically requiring informed consent by subjects. Subjects at the Allen Memorial Institute did not sign any consent forms, nor did they in most cases have any idea of what they were getting into. This was the standard rather than the exception. And this was all part of the MK Ultra research. Two of Cameron's assistants were Leonard Rubinstein, an electrical whiz of Cockney descent who lacked medical bona fides, who effused about the possibilities of equipment that will keep tabs on people without their knowing, and Dr. Walter Freeman, who had performed 4,000 frontal lobotomies in 20 years, reportedly on persons often suffering only from depression or paranoia. Freeman went on to become a highly successful brain specialist working for many years in San Francisco. In 1979, a public interest legal case was launched against the CIA for their activities during MKUltra period, with the details of the lawsuits appearing in the Hamline Journal of Public Law and Policy. Dr. Paul Termeson appeared in court as an expert witness and described what had happened to Robert Logie, one of Cameron's patients at Ravenscrag. This is what he stated. Instead of a standard treatment, Mr. Logie underwent a series of experimental, highly controversial procedures. Mr. Logie was not a suitable subject for any of the experimental procedures he was subjected to. Indeed, anyone wouldn't be suited or would be suited for such procedures. Most certainly, no one would be suitable to the type of experimental procedures used at Allen's Memorial Institute at the time, unless they had volunteered to undergo those procedures. Dr. Termanson said that after being subjected to Cameron's experiments, existence could best be termed marginal. He managed to function, work, and exist, but barely. Another expert witness in the trial, Dr. Brian Dole, provided information on the case of Rita Zimmerman, who was quote-unquote de-patterned by Cameron with 30 electroshocks. She had 56 days of drug-induced sleep, was subjected to 14 days of negative psychic driving, and then was given 18 days of positive psychic driving. Dr. Dole said that Mrs. Zimmerman was not a candidate for electroshock therapy, much less the intensive de-patterning procedures that were so disruptive as to leave her incontinent as to bladder and bowel. The intensive electroshocks that were used to de-pattern Miss Zimmerman were clearly experimental, as was the entire de-patterning procedure that was carried out to an extreme in her case. Their nearly 2 months of drug-induced sleep over 1 month of psychic driving, Ms. Zimmerman underwent were equal extreme applications of clearly experimental procedures. The de-patterning, prolonged drug-induced sleep and psychic driving procedures would inevitably cause injury to her mental and physical health. Doyle commented similarly on a case from Florence Langleben, who had received electroshocks and LSD and was drugged for 43 days to sleep and for 43 days of psychic driving. Miss Langleben was not a candidate for the shock therapy either, much less the intensive depatterning. Miss Langland was clearly experimental and was the entire depatterning procedure. The 6 weeks of drug-induced sleep and 6 weeks of psychic driving were extremely experimental procedures. They caused her inevitable injury to her mental health and her physical health. And then there were more victims like Mary Marrow. She was a nurse. After completing a residency in neurology at the University of Michigan, she approached Cameron for the fellowship at Allen Memorial. According to a legal document filed in D.C., because Cameron thought she appeared nervous, he told Dr. Morrow that a medical examination would be required before her application could be considered. Dr. Morrow was then hospitalized at the Royal Victoria Hospital, a facility with McGill University and Allen Memorial Institute. After she left the Royal Victoria Hospital, Dr. Morrow was admitted as a paying patient at the Allen Memorial Institute in 1960. She was placed under Cameron's care for an 11-day period from May 19, 1960 to May 29, 1960. Dr. Morrow was subjected to depatterning experiments employing Page-Russell electroconvulsion shock treatments and a variety of barbiturates, specifically thorazine and anectine. The combination of these drugs produced a condition of brain anoxia, meaning she had insufficient oxygen reaching her brain. Dr. Morrow, on June 17, 1960, she was transferred at her family's insistence to the medical department of Royal Victoria Hospital, where she was diagnosed as suffering from acute laryngeal edema, which is a severe allergic reaction to drugs. This is crazy. This is a nurse that was going to be working for the doctor, and she was tricked into going into a hospital, and then they damaged her like this after she just finished her residency or her time in the university. Unbelievable. And then they did this to another person, a 42-year-old tennis professional. I guess this was a very well-known tennis professional, Harold Bloyer. He had been suffering from depression after his divorce, and in December 5th, 1952, checked himself into a psychiatric hospital in Manhattan. Unbeknownst to him, the hospital had contracted the U.S. Army for a chemical warfare test, and they used mescaline derivatives. Lacking any information as to whether the derivatives had ever been tested on humans, the doctors at the hospital injected Bloyer 5 times with a concoction. Records showed that for a while, Bloyer seemed to be experiencing some improvement, although it was questionable how mescaline might have contributed to it. Whatever the case, the experimentation on Bloyer was continued until a 5th injection in 1953. That dosage was 16 times the strength of the first injection. Bloyer began to sweat and then went into convulsions, frothing at the mouth. The man lapsed into a coma and was pronounced dead 2 hours later. So this guy goes into a hospital for depression. They experimented on, and then they kill him with an overdose. Guess what? That's why I never go to hospitals. I don't trust the government. I never go to hospitals, never go to a therapist. Don't believe in any, bullshit about government doing things for me. If I go work for the government, there is no trust. There will never be any trust because they've proven time and time again their history is do whatever they want, experiment on anyone they want. The public doesn't matter. The citizenry doesn't matter. The populations of the world don't matter. They're racist, eugenicist, because that's what they are. And white folks, they're racist against you. Okay, their bloodlines is not yours, and they're psychotic. So, for all you conspiracy theorists out there, keep on doing you. Don't trust anything anybody says. So they killed him 2 hours later. He died. The hospital did not inform the lawyer's relatives that he had passed away and that he was a victim of chemical warfare experiments. Instead, they said that he died of an overdose of a drug. When Bloyer's family sued, the claim was settled at $18,000. Man, half of it was provided by the government through the hospital, on condition that the nature of the experimentation done on Bloyer be kept secret. Wow. Wow. And then they go on to say Harry Aslinger, head of the Federal Narcotics Bureau, supervised one such operation run by George Hunter White, a narcotics officer who had organized a spy training school during World War II. Using CIA funding, White rented an apartment in Greenwood. And check it. Here's another one for you. A Federal Narcotics Bureau. That would be like, what is it? The DEA, right? Let me see if they still exist. Hold on before I continue, because this is crazy. Crazy. Federal Narcotics Bureau. Do they still exist? No, they don't. Okay. So what's the new version of the DEA? Okay, so it's the DEA now. So imagine that, and by the way, we know that the DEA is involved in shady stuff. Fast and Furious. Or was it? Was it the D? Yeah, I think it was the DA. No, it wasn't the DA. Who was it? It was the other one, the other bureau. Fast and Furious. So the the old version of the DEA, right? The Federal Narcotics Bureau supervised an operation where they used a narcotics officer who had organized a spying training school during World War II. They used CIA funding, rented an apartment in Greenwich Village, and equipped it with surveillance with a two-way mirror. They were posing as seamen and artists, lured unsuspecting individuals into the apartment and gave them LSD. The large number of adverse reactions to the LSD, some requiring the subjects to have weeks of hospitalization. So they tested this on unsuspecting individuals. They called it, the code name was Stormy. They did this in San Francisco, which was their base of operations. They called it Operation Midnight Climax. They paid prostitutes to bring in customers to their quote unquote unsafe houses for unconventional actions. They would spike the drinks, lace the drinks with LSD, and then they would observe the individual's reactions through the mirror. Wow. And they did this up to 1963. And this was, again, the Federal Narcotics Bureau. It's kind of like how the FBI creates the terrorist and then stifles the plot. provides the funding, provides the equipment, and then says that they caught a terrorist. Same concept. Unbelievable. So, although an extended period of agency soul searching followed, bullshit, there was no soul searching. There's no such thing. The operations continued until 1966. So it started in 1950. Wait. Let me see where it started. Where's that date? Hold up. Wait a minute. When did it start? 1953, basically, right? Because it started in the hospital and then they did the operation. So they were experimenting on people since 1953 to 1966. Supposedly, they ended it in 66. So the revelations about the safe house experiments and the operations continued till 66. When White retired from the Narcotics Bureau, White reminisced about his CIA mission in a quote made famous by the chroniclers of the CIA and mind control. This is what he said. I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. He was enjoying watching people freak out and go crazy and lose their mind. And then he continues and says, where else could, this is a son of a bitch. I hope he's in hell. Let me repeat that again. So White said, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American, a boy lie, a boy kill, a boy that can cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and the blessing of the all highest in the land? One prominent victim of MKUltra was Philip Graham, a graduate of the Army Intelligence School in Pennsylvania, and the owner and publisher of the Washington Post and Newsweek magazine. The owner and publisher of the Washington Post, Army Intelligence, and Newsweek magazine. Graham made the mistake of attacking the American news media in a speech to a meeting of publishers in January of 1963. Leslie Farber, a psychiatrist from the CIA's Chestnut Lodge, was dispatched to deal with Graham. Graham was drugged and flown to Maryland, where after 10 days he was released, only to be returned to Chestnut Lodge in June. Released into the custody of his wife in August, he was found shot to death, allegedly by suicide. So again, this is what the CIA does. This is what the military does. This is what our government officials do. And then we're supposed to respect and honor these so-called institutions of honor. Forgive me. Fuck you. No. So because he said something again in the newsroom against the publishers, he was attacked, kidnapped, basically drugged, then flown to Maryland, CIA headquarters, probably hospital, put in there for 10 days, probably tortured, and then returned back home, where later he was found shot to death. And they said it was suicide. His will was declared void because of insanity. And Katharine Graham, his widow, inherited the Washington Post and the Newsweek. Early in the research of mind control techniques, the disposal problem, quote unquote, when they kill people, was encountered, i.e., how to get rid of people who had been the subject of mind control programs. One way of dealing with these people or persons was to put them, according to the agency document, put them, quote unquote, in maximum custody until either operations have progressed to the point where their knowledge is no longer highly sensitive, or meaning to put them in prison or in mental institution, or the knowledge they possess in general will be of no use to the enemy. And by the way, the enemy is not Russia. The enemy is not China. The enemy is the public. That's who the enemy is to these people. It's us. This has nothing to do with the Russians. This has nothing to do with the Chinese. This has nothing to do with the Iranians or any other nation. It has to do with the populace. You can stay mad, motherfucker. I don't care. Send your energy all you want. I'm going to talk about this because you fuckers are evil. So, other means of disposal of the individuals would be putting them into a mental institutions, doing a lobotomy on them, and in certain cases, termination with extreme prejudice, which is killing them. In two series of tests in 1958 and 1959 and 1960, U.S. Army intelligence, in conjunction with the Army Chemical Corps of the CIA, began a program of testing LSD and other psychoactive compounds at the medical research laboratories at Edgewood Arsenal. The focus of the testing was unwitting test reaction. So again, drugging and going after individuals without their knowledge with the intention to find out how the LSD dosed the soldier. So find out how an LSD dosed soldier would fare during interrogation. Groups of military personnel were given EA 1729, the Army's code designation of LSD. Then they filmed while they were being interrogated. The interrogators tried to pry forth classified information from them. There were also memory impairment tests, evaluating the ability of the subjects to recall information that had been previously imparted, and drills and skills, including tank driving and anti-aircraft tracking and field maneuvers. After the first phase of testing, a letter was sent from the chief of the clinical division of Edgewood to the commanding general of the Army Intelligence Center, extolling the brilliant results of the acid test. Also recommended was the actual application of material, LSD, to be utilized in real situations on experimental basis, if possible. Again, they don't give a shit about you. U.S. Army Intelligence encouraged Edgewood to go ahead with the field testing. This headquarters has forwarded your letter to the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence and the Department of the Army, concurring in your recommendation that actual application of the material be utilized to real situations on an experimental basis. In correspondence between the Director of Medical Research of Edgewood and the Commander, Chemical Warfare Labs, it was indicated that the plan was to use LSD outside the U.S. on foreign nationals. On August 8, 1960, the Office of Assistant Chief of Staff and Intelligence Liaison Team flew to Europe to brief intelligence agencies on the joint project. At least two programs resulted, the first being Operation Third Chance, and a 90-day European project involving the administering of LSD to foreign nationals and one American soldier who had allegedly stolen classified documentation. Operation Derby Hat was a similar project planned to make place in Hawaii, although the accounts of it are contradictory. One source says that the project was aborted, while another one states that the Army Special Purpose Team trained in LSD interrogations questioned 7 alleged Japanese communists, putting at least one of them into a coma. Testing was apparently done on unknowing American citizens as well. These experiments were reportedly reserved for small groups of individuals, although there were suggestions of larger scale testing taking place at some point in the future, So again, they don't care because they were trying to find out if they can dose the whole city of LA. That was their plan. And it didn't work because of the chlorine in the water. So they went ahead before that, tested it in France to the little population town that 200 and something people went insane and several people died. If this is what we're doing, then we shouldn't be proud, okay? I'm not proud that the US does this. I'm not proud of the intelligence agencies. I'm not proud of the covert operations that they're engaging in because you know what? It doesn't benefit us. It doesn't benefit anybody. It benefits the foundations and the oligarchs and the aristocrats that run everything. It doesn't benefit us. Period. This is just evil shit that people like to do because they want to feel powerful and they want to be in control and they want to take resources and dominate. And if we continue on this path, this fucking place is going to blow and we deserve it. This whole world is going to go up in flames and we deserve it if we stand by and say that this is okay. Because this continues today in different forms. We want peace, but then we excuse this shit right here. You're never going to have peace. There's never going to be any peace anywhere because as long as these type of people are running things. There's no peace if we accept evil. And if we excuse it and justify it every day. So many people, I want to save humanity, yet you're looking away when it comes to this shit right here. We want to be selective on what evil we attack or what evil we expose. But this shit is in your face. And we want to target easy targets, like individuals that have been mind controlled. We never want to hit where it hurts. And that is the place of power. Let's be real, folks. We want to complain about everything. We want to complain about, the drag queens, and we want to complain about, the criminals out there, but we don't know what the hell is going on. We don't know why everything is just going upside down. It's not just demons running around. There's a system in place that's creating the environment and that's creating these people. And that is destroying our minds, your kids' minds, your great-grandkids' minds, your minds sometimes. I mean, the last month I've been reading you some scary fucking shit, real scary shit, like technology that oscillates your brain and they can put voices in your head and they can put thoughts in your head, making pretend it's your own. I mean, that shit is scary. And then on top of that, they're doing this shit and they're combining it all. And then they're threatening people and then they're going after people physically, like in the real world, the only place you can fight. So combine all these things, we're in trouble. And then they want to hit you spiritually too. So they were testing was apparently done unknowingly to American citizens as well. These experiments were reportedly reserved for small groups of individuals, although there were suggestions of larger scale testing taking place at some point in the future. The Chemical Corps Major General Creasy remembered, this is what he stated, I was attempting to put on with a good cover story to test to see what would happen if the subway systems or the subways, for example, testing to see what would happen to subways, for example, when a cloud was laid down on a city. So a cloud of LSD, which nowadays they can probably do with fentanyl because there's fentanyl gas. So he wanted to see what would happen to people with LSD gas in the subway system. It was denied on reasons that always seemed a little absurd to me. So this is one of our generals major generals. It was denied, and it was absurd for me. Records show that the Chemical Corps officers were routinely given acid and LSD during their training at Fort McCluhan, Alabama. Other tests of LSD on Army personnel were conducted at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. And they were also in the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. They did these experiments in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and Fort Benning in Georgia. By the mid-1960s, at least 1,500 Army personnel are documented as having been used in Chemical Corps LSD experiments. Other researchers that were funded by the military included Charles Savage at the Naval Medical Research Institute, Amedeo Marazzi of the University of Minnesota, and Missouri Institute of Psychiatry James Dill of the University of Washington. They also had Gerald Klee of the University of Maryland Medical School, Neil Birch of Baylor University, Henry Beecher of Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital, and Paul Hodge and James Cattell of the New York State Psychiatric Institute. Soon the Army would go on to a bigger, but not necessarily better things. Hoffman and LaRouche, a pharmaceutical company in Nutley, New Jersey, was the Army's source for new psychoactive compounds. Quinusclidinly, I don't know how to say that, benzylate. So I guess benzylate. This is a drug with even more profound effects than LSD. The effects last for about 3 days, but have been known to last for 6 weeks. One Army doctor noted that BZ, during the period of acute effects, the person is completely out of touch with his environment. Dr. Van Sim, who was chief of clinical research division at Edgewood Arsenal, routinely tested on himself all of the new drugs that he would later give to recruits. Sim reported BZ would zonk me out for 3 days. I kept falling down, and the people at the lab assigned someone to follow me around with a mattress. Army testing of BZ began at Edgewood Arsenal in 1959 and continued all the way through 1975. Holy shit, 15 years. That's crazy. Dr. Solomon Snyder of Johns Hopkins University, that's why I don't trust Johns Hopkins, who was involved in drug testing for the Chemical Corps, stated, "The Army is testing LSD, and that was just a sideshow compared to the use of BZ, or benzene. An estimated 2,800 soldiers were given BZ, with some of them suffering from drug-related disabilities to this day. BZ deployed in the Grenadiers. BZ was deployed in grenades, mortar shells, and missiles. This was allegedly also used in combat in Vietnam. They got the information from Operation Mind Control, British Psychiatry from Eugenics and Assassination, and Canon Martin's The Controllers of the New Hypothesis of Alien Abductions. So tomorrow we'll get into Brave New World, or the Brave New World, New World Order. Again, the Tavistock Institute is involved. The U.S. military is involved. They talk about Aldous Huxley and him spearheading the Tavistock LSD project, the open conspiracy, and what else? And then continue on the LSD, the world controllers, how they used it, and the cults of the British. the cults of Britain and the United States, where it involves Nazis, world elitists, their ideologies, the use of children, the cults that were into homosexuality or bisexuality, and the royals. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit on notification for future live streams and videos. If you want to support monetarily, support me at the links in the description: PayPal, Cash App, Bitcoin, Patreon. We should not respect any institution, any government institution, any medical institution, any foundation, any think tank, because they're all psychotic. They all have a different philosophy than the common person out in the street. They all think we're different from them. They don't care if you die. They don't care if I die. They don't care if they destroy the country. They don't care, if our society crumbles. They only care about their power, their prestige, their money, and if they will be on top, controlling the rest of the masses around the world. It's pretty clear. It's simple. We've seen their pattern. We know their history, and it's time for us to wake the fuck up. Just keeping it 100. All right. See you guys tomorrow. Stay safe. Talk to you soon. Bye.